Welcome. I'm your host, Carl Nelms, and this is the Bloke Psychology Podcast, where we discuss everything from men's health, mental health, relationships, psychology, masculinity, and pretty much everything that relates to being a man in today's society. Episode 5 already, and in today's episode we chat to Richard Coyne. Now, if anybody's heard some of our content, or maybe heard myself on another podcast, or even heard me speak, one thing I often will say is too many men lose themselves in the process of providing for their families. And too many men get caught on that treadmill of life, and in the process neglect themselves, neglect their families and what truly matters to them in life, and they lose perspective about their priorities. Richard's story is a great example of that. He was a high-flying executive working in a very exciting industry, and in only a few years he found himself losing most of the things that really mattered to him in his life, and almost losing everything, to finding himself in a psychiatric inpatient program, but fortunately to reconnecting with what did matter in life, finding himself and what works for him and his mental health. Like most of the lived experience episodes, this is quite raw, so I'd really encourage you that if it does bring up some challenging thoughts, feelings, discomfort, have a chat to somebody you trust. Reach out to Lifeline, Men's Line, or an equivalent service in your local area. And of course, have a chat to your registered health professional for consultation and individual advice. Enjoy, guys. And welcome back to the Bloke Psychology Podcast, everyone. Thank you for tuning in again. Today, my guest is Richard Coyne. Richard, welcome to the Bloke Psychology Podcast, mate.
Hi, Carl. How are you? Welcome to the audience.
Well. Thank you. Thank you for giving us your time and joining us today, Richard. Richard and I spoke, I think it was probably a few months ago before all this COVID stuff hit us, and he set up a men's yoga program or I suppose classes local to us, which is much needed. That was music to my ears. But one of the things that intrigued me about Richard was just in the short chat we had, the brief overview of his recent struggles and challenges and journey with mental health in particular. And I thought Richard would make an incredible guest to share his story with you all. So the first question I wanted to throw at you, Richard, to jump into it was, when did this begin for you? What was that point at which you realized that something's not working for you and something needed to change?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I probably got a couple of points, and just in terms of my own self-awareness. I think I can go back to about 2014. I was about 20 years into a corporate career at that stage. I'm 54. And I worked in media, worked in sport, had elevated myself. And I'm always careful about the words I use around this, because I don't wish to so much celebrate the seniority of the role, but just give an indication of work-life balance and stress. So I've been pretty successful and elevated myself to a senior role that you'd call an MD or a CEO. And I worked around sport, and that involved a life around the Australian Football League, Cricket Australia, National Rugby League, tennis, all of those things. And as you can probably imagine, a job like that is pretty busy during the week, like everybody's jobs. But then you execute your job on the weekend. So the thing that you're working towards is doing something on the weekend, whether that's the broadcast of the game, the event management of the game. And I was involved with a very large organisation run by a very influential Australian man who'd grown his business to become extraordinarily successful. And I had a weekend of sport, which was during the footy season. I started on the Thursday night with a Thursday night game, and I'd hosted guests. I think I even went out with those guests afterwards, and you can imagine, it's corporately done. So I've had a few beers, and then we've gone down to Swan Street like all good Richmond supporters do these days and head down there and celebrate a grand final, and then kicked on to a bar, woke up probably not feeling the best in myself on the Friday. There was another game of football on the Friday night. I had guests again. I went and did that. I think I doubled up on the Saturday with an afternoon game and a night game. And the night game on the Saturday night was my team playing an interstate team, West Coast Eagles versus Collingwood. And I took a couple of mates, again, with hospitality. I live in Hampton. My kids are involved at Hampton Footy Club, and I found myself on the Sunday afternoon at a thing called At Home with the Rovers, which is a community event around the local amateur footy club and our kids. And there I was drinking a beer again, and I was having a second beer, and I was looking at what was in my hand. I was thinking about the next day at work, and I couldn't control any of the anxiety. And at that very point, I knew I'd spent the whole of the last 4 days self-medicating with alcohol, that the levels of stress had become so much that I didn't necessarily know how to function around work, but I was disguising it as customer engagement. And I walked out into the car park, sat in my car and rang the HR director. The HR director asked me what I was doing, checked in that I was safe. I said, yes. We went into discussing what should happen next. It was a short break. It turned into a 6-week break from work. And I participated in something which a lot of your listeners would probably be familiar with, which is that EAP, Employee Assistance Programs, where I was engaged and put in contact with a counsellor, and no discredit to the counsellor, I'm put in contact with someone who is somewhat remote from me, is not chosen by myself, doesn't really understand my background, but the company is doing its best to find if it can help me and get me in a better position. And I started, so I started in that, let's say in an organised way with work support, but from home, I just went exploring. And I think the first thing I did was buy a mindfulness book. And I wish I could say I could remember what it was. It took me on a very different journey. And if anyone knows who Wim Hof is, and I don't know if you know who Wim Hof is, yes, Carl.
The Iceman.
The Iceman. I haven't had a hot shower for 6 years. So I went into this whole sort of experiential thing about managing, anticipating what might be coming ahead by understanding your physical experience. And living Bayside, I turned that into winter swimming and being down by the sea. Returned to work. I went back to work. 6 weeks later, I'm back at work. I've got some skills, I've got some knowledge, but I'm not better. I'm far from better. And that's 2014 going into 2015. Is this all right to just share it as a journey?
Yeah. I suppose I had a question for you there, Richard, because those 6 weeks, I mean, to be such a, I hope you don't mind me putting it like this, but a high-flying sort of executive, the top of your game at the time, to step out of that role and take 6 weeks and remove yourself from the work life, that must have been extremely hard.
I was a lot sicker than I realised, and I let go of things really easily. It wasn't until about, I guess somewhere around about the 4-week mark, I was being asked to come back on a limited basis, and I only went back to work on a limited basis for the next 2 months, 3 days a week. Letting go wasn't hard at that moment.
Okay.
I think there was alcohol dependency. I think I was focusing there, and I needed to clean myself up. It was easy to know that I needed to do that physically. So was I fearful? Yeah, I think, when you said, when does a journey like this start? If I went to, family of origin stuff, I say I was highly demanding of myself. I grew up in a family of high performers, if you like, and there was always an expectation. That was the hardest thing about stepping away, is judgment from, I've got an 86-year-old dad, So why are you away from work? Well, it's, I'm not quite right. What does that mean? We can get that sorted. You should be right by Monday, bandage you up and get you back. So they were probably more of the challenges. There was a reasonable amount of empathy coming out of the business.
Okay. Yeah. The other question I had whilst you were unpacking that first little bit was, I've got a few mates and I have plenty of clients who work in that sort of space, where it be sort of sales events or whatnot. But there's a lot of that sort of client hospitality, corporate stuff where I think a lot of people get caught up in justifying their extracurriculum activities, which often involves events, beers, and other things at times. But it's very easy to justify that as work, isn't it?
Extremely easy. And it does a couple of things. One, you can justify it to yourself, and then develop escapism. And not only are you calling it something that's a responsibility and part of your work life, you begin to abdicate some of your responsibilities to the other part of your life, your relationships. Most importantly, if you're married or in a partnership, the person that you love, and you start talking about your need to be away. It's not only hospitality, Carl, it can also be business travel. There's an addiction to business travel that occurs. And so there's hospitality at things that are close and nearby. My job was taking me away and overseas in the travel industry, what you'd call an educational. My educationals were going to things like the Super Bowl or, across to Wimbledon. And whilst there were times when it was completely unnecessary, I could easily find a way to justify it. And I guarded it. Carl, you'd start guarding that stuff because it's the privileges that come around with the job. And so your behaviours and your decision-making get corrupted. The engagement with your children. And I had a very, very good psychologist ask me at one point, I attended 440 games of footy, roughly. So that gives you an indication of how much time I was away. And that's before all the days of cricket and all the days of rugby. So you can think about the amount of time away from home. But I had a psychologist say, so how often would you take your kids to the game? And I said, well, nearly every chance I get. And they go, well, what's the game like in celebrating it with your son? And my son was the oldest. He was the most passionate about footy. And so, he loves it. He loves it. He sits down the front. He's right in the window and he's enjoying himself. He goes, yeah, but what's your engagement? What's your connection? I said, well, I'm at work. I'm engaging with the clients. And he said, well, you're not at the footy with your son. And that was the truth. I was doing something. I thought I was engaged, but it was, I don't know what the correct term for it would be, but it felt like, in the end, I realized it was masking. We were away, but we weren't connected. I wasn't, I think in the sort of technical way we talk about, I wasn't present. I've had a lot more fun going to the footy and sitting in the proper seats, next to him. Unfortunately, he had a Collingwood West Coast grand final. That didn't turn out exactly as we wanted. And I know there might be international listeners, but if they can imagine that in the terms of it being at a Super Bowl or an FA Cup or whatever it might be. So I'm now more connected, but I was masking. There were cards in my wallet. They were important. They were platinum Qantas. They were access to different parts of football grounds. And yes, that's a long answer to saying there's a lot of people like me, I believe, who explain to their partners their need to be out till 2 o'clock in the morning. And that, if we were having this at the end of the conversation, that's part of very much what I've let go and redefined about myself. I don't do that anymore.
And I think even that, Richard, I mean, we'll go into when you return to work in a second, but so many men get caught on that treadmill of trying to climb that corporate ladder. And I suppose on paper at the time, a lot of people would have thought you had the perfect life, I'm guessing. You're living in beautiful suburb in Hampton, the kids, the family, the picket fence, the great job with all the perks. But things aren't always... well, things aren't always as they seem, are they? And just because you're at the top of that career sort of ladder, so to speak, doesn't necessarily mean that brings happiness and all those things that we're all pursuing.
I had status, I had access, but I didn't have myself. And if if I don't have myself, and if I don't really understand myself, then I can't be the best husband, I can't be the best dad, I can't be the best friend, or brother, or son. And so for all that was there, it was destructive. So yes, there's a lot of that around. I think if there's listeners here who have had similar experiences, and it doesn't have to be about seniority, it can be just in any job. When you have that moment that you recognise that you're holding on to something so tightly that it's causing stress in the other part of your life, that's the liberating moment if you choose to start talking about it. And I didn't get the chance to talk about it the right way, having that 6-week break. I got some surprises when I did go back to work. I got some really sharp surprises about the kind of person I was when I returned to work, and people gave me some feedback. I got some real surprises about how thought about how I could be a better person. And that was a journey of leadership, which was fortunate, but it wasn't changing me. I was changing myself tactically, if you like, but I wasn't getting to the deeper self.
So you went back after the 6 weeks, but as you said, yeah, you might have had some strategies and a little bit of insight. Maybe you're marginally better, but things weren't right.
Things weren't right. And I got some feedback about how much I scared people at work. So that uptight, dedicated, demanding leader, it's an anathema, really, because that's not a leader, that's just a bully, came back to me in sharp focus. And it came back to me from one of my most dearest managers, who just, with support from the structures of the organisation through HR, came back to say how fearful he was of the way that he engaged with me and his confidence to be able to execute his job without judgment. And we were going through at that stage a liberation from a privately owned company into a publicly listed company, and an awareness that we'd all behaved very much like our boss had behaved, our owner had behaved. And now being owned by an international company who wanted to liberate us for our own skills, were asking us to go through training and development that allowed us to be better for ourselves, to be better for our people. But that very same person that I was just talking about had to take a break 2 weeks after I got back, and had to take a break for almost exactly the same reasons. And that shone a big light on me, because now the things that I was doing were the things that he was doing, and I couldn't reflect on the fact that I felt possibly that I was being executively bullied, and I was just translating that and pushing it down the line a little bit, for the older listeners, a little bit like that ad used to be about, if this parcel isn't in Sydney in the morning, it's your job. There was an old ad about parcel post or something. You just passed it down the line. And I think people talk about it, you need stress good stress in your life to get you motivated and get you going. I used enormously high levels of stress to really drive. And I expected, in that perfectionistic sense, I demanded of people what I expected of myself and pushed people too hard. I didn't give air or breadth to learning and learning by mistake. That's a pretty shit environment for people to work in, to be totally honest. And I think I know I had a reputation for that eventually. Sometimes in the earlier days, I think I was thriving on it, Carl. I thrived on the idea that in negotiation meetings, I might be the one that was feared for my temperament, for how I would approach conflict, and conflict in the sense of, a disagreement, but how I might amplify that. And I thought that was a skill. I really thought that was a skill. Mm-hmm. And all the while, that's burying deeper and deeper into myself. And in some ways, I'm becoming that isolated person. I'm not a leader. I'm not friends with the people that I work with. I want to hold on to what I've got. I'm not allowing other people to evolve and become better than I am. I'm keeping structures the same, all possibly for the trappings of what the job had. So it became more and more stressful. and I could talk a long time about that workplace environment. It was really interesting, and there's a lot of correlation to what I was going through then, as to why people are feeling so liberated in their homes now and working at home, away from possibly the people who talk too much, the people who pressure them too much, and their productivity is going up. There's a lot of learnings that we can talk about at another time. But coming out of that 2014 into 2015, it was rocky. My then wife didn't necessarily understand, and didn't understand that I was trying to sit quietly in those 6 weeks when I was home, that I was trying to find myself. It was tough. She saw it as laziness, and while she was talking to the idea of possibly depression, and she'd had her own mental health challenges as a younger woman, but started throwing around, in this less than expert way, things about depression, things about bipolar. So I'm starting to try and understand myself. I don't want to get professional help, and I'm muddling my way through. 6 months on from that, she's thinking that the best thing for us to do is to separate. It's not going to work. We're looking at separation and divorce. My parents returned from a cruise, and they've been traveling around North America. My mum thinks she's got DVT. She goes into hospital. She comes out of hospital diagnosed not with DVT but with lung cancer, and it looks like it's going to be rapid and it's going to be tough. So we've got a couple of things overlapping. I'm trying to figure myself out at work, trying to re-engage, trying to support a colleague who is away from work with mental health challenges of his own, and at least I was getting better to acknowledge it in others. I was then thrown a corporate challenge, which is one of our biggest customers, turned around and said, "You've got 2 months to figure this problem. It's probably about $150 million problem. And we've got somebody who's told us they can do it, so we can take the contract off you, or you can show me in 2 months how you do it." And it was a big infrastructure project, but it just laid itself on top. And I hope that doesn't come across as celebrating something about the size and scale of a job. It's really just about what it put into me as the biggest job in my life, which was myself, my relationship with my family, and my relationship with my wife, which should have been more important, was presented in front of me. So that middle-aged bloke, 48, 49, maybe 50 years of age, I'm looking at this stuff and going, the most important thing is the work thing. And I start ignoring the others. My mum ended up in Freemasons. The project was based at the MCG. I'm walking up and down between Fitzroy Gardens, between the hospital and the MCG, apologising to my mum because I need to get back to work, and I'm torn on that walk about how to reasonably spend your time and get people to acknowledge that. I think I passed through the early stages of denial and anger, and I got to acceptance very, very quickly, and a lot quicker than other members of my family. So I was at that point that I wanted to nurse my mum, get her to acknowledge where she was at. She was still in denial, and all of this is going on around me. And I am beginning as a human being to completely shut down, lose my relationship with my father because he can't cope, and I just seen his lack of coping skills as an affront to my mum. I'm tired of my work because it's interfering with my life. My wife's saying that we should actually split and I should go and find an apartment. We pass through that time and get into, I'm a little bit, there's a fair amount of mist in this in terms of being able to put things down to days and dates. But I ended up in a very extraordinary situation, finished that project. I had a meeting with my boss. I was out the door 2 hours later. My mum had died 2 weeks before, and I found myself walking into a single man's apartment a week after that. So the trilogy just came together in a perfect storm of, let's call it unemployment, death in the family, and loss of marriage. And I wasn't equipped. I was not nearly well enough equipped for coping.
I mean, Richard, just on that, I mean, you've been hit on so many levels at that point when you find yourself as a single man, divorcee, separated in the apartment, unemployed, grieving. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is we know the statistic of 6 blokes a day in Australia take their own lives, and the main factors that contribute to that are unemployment or financial issues, relationship breakdown, and grief. I
Yeah.
mean, was that your rock bottom moment?
No, no, no.
Wow. Okay.
I somehow, I the next 2 years just, um, I don't know what the right word for it is, but it was pretty messy. So in, in teenage boys, um, psychology, it would probably be called just the normal bit of recklessness, but this was adult recklessness on a reasonably grand scale. So 2 weeks later, I was on a flight to Los Angeles on my own with no plans, with a bag packed, and just jumped in a cab, went straight to Santa Monica. I had a few favourite bars from different trips that I've been doing through work life, and just sort of sorted myself out from there, or didn't sort myself out. Just spent 2 weeks. So actually, I have a friend in Los Angeles. He flew out to Australia. I ended up taking his apartment, and then had 2 weeks of just, let's call it madness. I thought I was doing the right thing. So it's amazing how. So when probably people are hearing this and thinking that I was out every night till 4 o'clock in the morning in bars and nightclubs or whatever, that's not actually what happened. I joined a gym in a place called Brentwood. I joined a gym. I was eating from a store called Whole Foods. So I was eating really healthily, going to the gym, probably about 4 o'clock. I'd have a beer. And then I could probably tell you that when I looked at it the next morning, there was probably 10 beers and a bottle of wine. So I was almost functioning alcoholic stuff. I was getting up and going back to the gym, and I was going for walks, and I was doing hikes up into the mountains and stuff. But I was just masking myself and just pretending that this was my getaway to look inside and to better myself. But that was just a crock. There was no it was a great Facebook story. It was a really, really good Facebook story. And I could show you photos that make me look like some kind of elite athlete, and it's just ridiculous. I did spend 3 days. I went up to, I can't remember the name of the shop, but I went up to a stationery shop and bought a big pack of Post-it notes, 3 legal pads, colouring pencils, pens, the whole lot. And I locked myself away for 3 days and did the whole corporate disassembly of myself. What do I know? Who do I know? What is their value to me? What is my value to them? All of this sort of corporate stuff to outline and articulate a plan for when I got back to Australia about how I was going to re-emerge and go back to work. It was all about work, and none of it was about me. And I set myself on a very determined journey to get back. So the next 2 years, I could really define it as just saying, I will be back. I will be at that senior role. I will demand the commensurate salary at the point which I left, and ignored pretty much everything else. So I don't know whether I don't know if you indulge that much in Facebook, but Facebook actually gave me this sort of certainty, because I'd go on and people post these statements about only pursue your dream, only do your passion, only do not relent, do not stop, break through, all of these things. And I'd read them, and I'd be lying in bed, barely functional on some mornings, and I'd read them and say, that's it. Do not give up this journey. Do not give up this chase. And I was chasing a very, very small industry, which provides only a few opportunities every now and again. A bit like a footy coach losing his job, a senior footy coach, and then saying, I'll be back. Well, we know how rare that is. And I was about as naive. So that was doubling down on me. And as someone said, every time you went, I think I got to about 250 different job applications, 400 odd interviews. in a very narrow field, and I was getting there, and I was getting close quite often. But my stress levels, so the classic thing, the person in a job relaxes, says, I wouldn't mind that, but if I don't get it, I can, I'm still in one, engage and get it. I'm treating everyone as a major project. It's tightening me up more and more. I'm not particularly well in myself, and I'm presenting that way. So people were frightened of me. I was scaring people off, yet I was trying to go for a job, and I just couldn't see it, and I wouldn't listen. And Carl, I don't know how much you talk with clients or with listeners. One of the things for me that I had only became apparent to me as I began to get well was that when you're really sick, when you're really in trouble, you're actually deaf to all of this. So even those around you are trying to support you and just coax you with kind words, not hit you on the end of the nose and say you're not well, but maybe see if they can just reframe you a bit or push you towards professional help. You just become so adept at masking, and also just so fundamentally deaf to yourself and to those around you. And I was really deep into that. At that end of that 2-year period, I moved back into the house. So I moved back into the family home. I'd made a huge promise to my kids that they wouldn't have to move out of the family home. So all of this happening at the same time, my belief I'd be back at work, not a lot of debt around, we were financially sort of well positioned, but it was just getting worse and worse and worse the longer I was out of work. And I was going to fail on the biggest thing that you can fail at, and that was a failure of a promise, an overstated promise to my 3 kids. And I moved back into the house. I was renovating the unit that I live in now, and my ex-wife was actually helping me with a mate. We were painting it, tidying up the floorboards, moved all my stuff out, moved it back into the family home, and Jean and I had a really clumsy conversation about saying that what we should do is staunch the financial bleeding. So why didn't I move into the back of the house? And I thought, okay, I'll do that. And then I quickly organised and got a tenant, and the tenant signed off on the contract, and they had a 12-month lease. Within a month, it was a terrible mistake. A month later, I've got a job as a project manager at National Australia Bank, courtesy of a very, very close friend who thought they were getting me back on my feet. And I've got to be really careful about my gratitude for what that was. If I had have been well, that job would have suited me. I could have done it. But I was so unwell, and I so couldn't recognise myself in the job. So nothing about it. It wasn't about the status. It wasn't about the journey to work. It wasn't about the work that I was doing. It wasn't about the people around me. I simply didn't like myself. I really couldn't enjoy myself and just engage and have fun and work hard at the job. And there were plenty of new skills to learn. So I would get back to a house where I'm not loved, and my kids are there, but I'm not in a loving environment. I go straight to a room, get straight into bed, sleep through to the very last minute that I would need to get up, to get myself together, to get to work. And that was really hard, that first feet on the floor. And that went on for 7 or 8 months. I've got opinions about, how people need to be helped in some sort of roles, and that's also another conversation. But it was starting to break me completely, and I was now in that deep state of night sweats, inability to sleep, self-medicating, scared to move around the home, scared to do things for fear of conflict, hiding. I go jump in the car, and I live 200 metres from Hampton Beach, but I'd get in the car and drive the car to Greenpoint, throw a duvet doona in the car and park up and sleep in the back of the car just for respite and just to feel like I was in a safe place. And I'd spend most of the weekend there. And it was, at this stage, it was getting worse. I'm a cyclist. My close buddies in cycling were acutely aware. and they were trying to. Some of their messages were starting to get through, but I was turning that into rumination, not action. So I was hearing it, but doubling down on myself. And eventually, the tenants of the place that we'd renovated wanted to get out. And I said, great, look, I'd be happy to release it and get myself back there, which is only a couple of 100 metres away from the family home. We did that, put the house on the market. It had to happen. Went through that process. I've got to say I barely functioned around it. I couldn't cope with talking. I was angry, actually. I was what real estate agents see a lot of times when it's a marital split. There's just a lot of anger across the table, and I praise them for their tolerance and their acceptance of. It's probably part of their job that nobody ever really sees, is how often they've got to cope with two parties going through something horrendous in their lives, and the thing that's at stake is the thing that allows maybe some financial well-being, not personal well-being. And the guys that did that for us were just they were extraordinary, and I owe them a debt of gratitude for their patience with me as a person. We got that done, and then interestingly enough, we had this. The people who bought the place asked if they could have a extension on the settlement, so it went to a 6-month settlement, which suited, which was good, except for one thing. The settlement date became my date with destiny. So you talk about the 6 men a day. My date became that date. The day that I lost the family home and I didn't have, so I finished at NAB. The day I didn't have the home, that I didn't have a job, and I'd failed my family and failed my kids and failed Jane, my wife, was the day that I needed to let myself go. And I started to plan. So they talk about, do you have a plan? And we were settling in the August. We sold in the March. That probably doesn't sound like 6 months. Maybe it is. By April and May, I'd had a vague first attempt. In May, I had a much better attempt. Sorry, I'm using the wrong language there. I made an attempt that didn't work, gratefully, thankfully, but I was out for, best estimates is it looks like it was about 3 days, but I was never found. I came to myself not in a good way, so I didn't tell anyone about it. Managed to get through it, and I was so absent and so disappeared that people had almost stopped contacting me, and no one was really. My kids weren't engaged with me at that stage. So the first time someone broke into my house and found me, and I'm forever grateful to her. The second time it was on my own, and we're getting closer to this date, and it's getting worse and worse, and it's I cannot break the cycle of failure in my thought processes. Is this all right to share this, Carl? Am I okay?
No, go for it, Richard. Go for it. If you're comfortable, feel free.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable, because along the way, just these simple markers about the inability to put your feet on the floor, the realization that you've been only in 2 rooms for 72 hours, not when made an attempt, but just in the passing of time, and you've really done nothing more than move from room to room, sleep, get up, maybe have some water, that you haven't changed your clothes for 3 days. You can look in the mirror and say, tomorrow I'll fix myself up, and tomorrow comes and you wake up at, I was a 5:30 riser, 5 o'clock riser, and I was still waking at that time and then going back to sleep. And I've seen the posters. I remember seeing the posters about anxiety and trying to understand anxiety. And this is just a little aside. And I've told people this. And the best way I try to describe it to someone who hasn't suffered truthful, fast anxiety, almost in the panic attack type, is if you can think about the times you've played that game when you're a kid or maybe a young adult. Sometimes I still do it with my kids, or used to do it with my kids. When you'd see how many laps of the pool that you could swim, you'd dive in and the person who won was a person who could get that many laps up and down the pool. And you push yourself and you get through that first lap and you're feeling really good. And that's like the first moment you wake up and your body's fresh and you're okay and you can hear the birds. And then the second lap, you're starting to feel a little bit of pressure around the lungs. You're just becoming aware that your body's probably not as great as you thought it was when you just woke up. Then the third lap is that tightening of the lungs and you're really pressured and you're feeling, wow, how much further can I go? What's going on? And then whooshka, you're out of oxygen. The panic rises up through the base of your spine, and it's that, they call it the parasympathetic nervous system. It just attacks you, and it's like a rush, and it's telling your brain to go and do something, come to the surface. And I would get that exact same feeling from the base of my feet rush through me about a minute and a half, 2 minutes after I woke up, and paralyze me to the bed, lock me down. It was almost like there were straps on me. So I had this minute and a half of feeling like I was on and up for the day. Look at my bike, look at the thing that I cherished and get out on the road, and then just freeze. And that's what was going on almost daily. I've been given medication, Carl. I'd had a prescribed medication from my GP. I can't remember what it was called, and it doesn't really matter, but its dosage had never been, it wasn't managed in, and it wasn't tested against what my feeling, how I was feeling. And so I thought I was doing, that's as good as it's ever going to get. And if this is all it can do, then nothing's going to improve. Kept on going for a few more weeks, and we got to June, beginning of June. My ex came over to the house and said, in 4 weeks' time, we need to pack up the house. In a couple of months' time, we need to pack up the house. And I don't want you to come around because I think it's going to break you. I think it will be the thing that tips you over the edge. And I'm really worried about you. And you need to start thinking about going and taking a break. And she presented me with some material, which was for a place called the Melbourne Clinic. And I just thought, this is nonsense, And she goes, I've done everything. So before you start talking about money, we're covered. You're okay. And you just need to think about it. I can't tell you to do it. And I'm thinking at this point, I grew up in sort of Bourne and Kew. So, I'm familiar with Wheelsmere and there's sort of pictures running through my head, all the stereotypes without referring to, Jack Nicholson and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just thinking, wow, I'm gone and I never come back. And that very same day, only 5 hours later, my sister came down from Queensland, and she came around to see me. And and this is the truth about mental health advocacy, and this is really where I began to recognise things. She asked me a question about how I was. I fudged it and masked it like I usually try to do. She told me that what she could see was not what she was hearing, and she asked me a question again. And in asking me the second time and having the patience to stay in front of me, I opened up like a can of worms right there at that point, because someone wasn't just going to take what I said and accept it. It was someone who's going to push me a little bit and gently. And gently. So I told her what Jane had said. I just opened up then and she said, well, do you promise me that will you at least just call them and allow them to do an assessment? And so I did. And I can't explain to people enough what that sense of relief was, that I was letting go of trying to hide, and that there was possibility that someone was going to look after me. And I don't mean clinically. I just felt like I was just going to be looked after. It was just enormous. It was, they couldn't take me there and then. They recognized, I told them everything, pretty much like this conversation. Maybe as unstructured as this is, or I can't remember. But they said, we're going to have to, we want to admit you, but we don't think that you're a risk to yourself. So they said, look, we're going to try and get you here as quickly as possible, but it may take as long as a week. This also may be valuable to your listeners. I decided to take, it was during the school holidays in the middle of the year, and I decided to take one of my kids away down the coast, down to South Gippsland. My sister has a little holiday shack down that way, and she said, "Why don't you just take 2 or 3 days, nice and comfortable down there? You really like it." I took Louise, my youngest, and we had a couple of nights together, really simple, just, a little bit of a little fire and some simple meals, and sat and watched some TV and went for some walks. And I'd let my guard down. I think I was, you probably call it, I think I was in a happy space. Anxiety is the wrong word. Anxious a little bit about where I was going. I was off to Richmond, and I was off to a hospital, and I knew that the hospital had control of my rights of access and rights of departure, and I was imagining what that would look like, but it wasn't. I wasn't overthinking it, and I was on the way. And we were halfway back to. We were driving back on the Friday, and I had my hands on the steering wheel. I'm looking out the window at the road, and I sort of had tingles in my fingers, but I didn't know where I was, and I didn't know why I was driving, and I didn't know where I was driving to. It was dual carriageway, and I didn't know if the other lane was actually traffic coming towards me or traffic. So it was a single lane road, or whether it was a dual carriage. I couldn't figure it out. And the car went past, and I thought it must be overtaking. And I looked at the speedo, and I was doing 100 kilometres, and I thought, what does that mean? I was trying to work things out. My daughter, who's 17 now, she had the music on, so it wasn't working for my head. It was really sharp, and there was no Neil Diamond playing. It was something that I didn't recognise. It was getting inside my head, quite literally, really rattling me. But I didn't know my daughter was in the car. I looked over and I saw a passenger, and I got the shock of my life. So I thought I had to slow down. And as I slowed down and pulled over onto the shoulder of the road, panic and anxiety came up, and it was so overwhelming that I thought if I stopped the car that I would literally jump out and just run away. I just felt like I had to run off into the bushland because I didn't know what was going on. So it was, I accelerated and kept on driving, and I figured, I saw a sign, and it just slowly brought things back. So I think that in a physiological and mental sense is the point where I was at the lowest, and was the point where I was at the closest to acceptance. And right there and then, when I got home, I was so, you probably imagine, Carl, the last bit of the drive, I was down near Tyab is where I was. So I had a bit to get back to Hampton. I dropped Louise off. I went back to my place. I was so unbelievably exhausted, really quite shaky, and just praying that I could get into the clinic because I knew people had to get a hold of me. So that journey started 2 days later. I was lucky enough to be able to get in 2 days later. And then it starts on a journey of, well, actually, no, there's what was I called? I was called oppositional. So when I arrived, I was a very cooperative admission patient, probably for the first hour. And then for the next 7 days, I was the most uncooperative individual, both to the psychiatrists, nurses. I didn't engage with any other patients, locked myself away in the room. I could easily have been placed on a ward with people with eating disorders. I didn't eat for the 7 days. I was...
Just to clarify, Richard, to confirm that anybody who's not familiar, the Melbourne Clinic, you admitted yourself to an inpatient psychiatric unit, essentially.
That's it. Yeah.
And just quickly, you're working that high-flying executive job that you told us about at the start to now sitting in the Melbourne Clinic as an inpatient. Yeah. What's the time frame between those two events?
2.5 years, 3 years.
Okay.
July last year. My sister took me. I did a little bit of decompression. The last 2 days, I stayed with my sister, who lives about 300 metres from the clinic. So we'd get up each morning, walk down to the clinic, wander the streets around the clinic, have a coffee, go back, just do that acclimatisation. And then there was an admission time given to us, and my sister took me down there. It's one of those things, what do you need? What are the things that you want around you? What are the books? What do you plan to do with your time? And I did all of that, then got in there and just said, I'll show you guys who can be difficult. I'll prove myself to be an extraordinarily difficult person. And I was appointed a fantastic psychiatrist, a ripping guy, and he is terribly, and he's so much smarter than I am and so much more capable than I am. And he led me down a path, let me go for a while. I was celebrating the idea of being I don't know if anyone knows who Bobby Sands is, but he was an ex-IRA militia. So he was arrested and placed into, I think it was Longkesh prison. This is back in the 70s. I come from something of an Irish Catholic background, and he went on a hunger strike for, I think he got to 40 days, but he did die. And I was emulating. So I was going to go on a hunger strike, and I was going to prove that this didn't need to happen. And I got to day 7, and the psychiatrist came in and said, "Hey, look, you're doing what you want to do, but I'm removing any rights to leave this building." And that, my liberty being completely taken away from me, was a cut point. And I was down to the canteen about a half an hour later, eating jelly and custard and beginning to comply. So, and I shouldn't. That's very unfair on Melbourne Clinic, because one thing that they do is they know the importance of nutrition and good food, and it is great food. But I just went to the jelly and custard bar. So the journey started then, and I said, I'm going to approach this. And I was flattered by the end of the second week that I was getting some feedback, that I was showing determination and a resolve to listen to all the different seminars and participate in classes and go and explore, that I was prepared to work through identifying the right types of medication that could support me. I talked, unfortunately, and it's probably coming through in this podcast, what I did learn is that middle-aged men, when they go through this crisis, have so much to get off their chest. There's a lot of younger people who might be going through mental health crisis or a mental health journey who are more circumspect. And I'm generalising, so it's unfair, and there's also women of the same age or of any age who have, I could see, had been better at self-identifying some of their challenges, were quieter with their words, more sensitive with the way that they would engage, and less introverted, so would listen and talk about others' needs, not just their own. So I found myself in that first week talking way too much, asking too many questions, trying to be smart, still trying to do that thing of being possibly the smartest person in the room, and then began to learn and slow down. I missed my yoga. I didn't believe yoga had been a byproduct of too much time, not an intention. So I joined the local gym. I had a lot of time during the day. I was going to the gym, doing my thing from time to time. And I passed a room in the gym. Door was open. 5 minutes of yoga class was starting. So this is probably now 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And I went into this room. I'm the only bloke. I'm on a mat down the back of the room. The skills of the teacher are extraordinary. The skills of the women in the room are amazing. The peacefulness is something I just didn't expect. The challenge of the exercise feels amazingly difficult. Yet I'm looking at women who have got maybe as much as 10, 15, 20 years on me, placing themselves in positions And I'm going, I don't get it. I'm lost. I've got a little bit of interest and I just want to go and explore. And it grabbed a hold of me. And the teachers were, I can't speak highly enough of what they were trying to do in a gymnasium setting, not a studio, yoga studio setting, to just impart some of that knowledge of mindfulness, slowing yourself down, understanding your body, understanding your mind, understanding the importance of connection and using breath to be the link between all of that. And so I started towards it, and it was amazing, and I felt myself physically getting better, and I was getting into positions that I thought were unusual, and enjoying that. And I was having the complete piss taken out of me by blokes that I'd otherwise have played footy with or gone cycling with, but nothing was swaying me from it. It was holding me. And I put that yoga as a reason that kept me safe, and had me make a couple of attempts, but attempts that were non-violent. I think anything's violent if you're looking at your life, but in that awareness that men tend to use a more violent means to bring about an end, I couldn't go there. I wasn't going there. And I look at yoga as being a very important part of having protected me. It didn't do everything, obviously. There was other things that have to be brought to you to help you be better, but yoga just did some great stuff. So I missed my yoga, and it was good, and I wanted to get back to it. I had a real difficulty and some challenges. There was plenty of yoga places in Richmond. My psychiatrist wouldn't let me out at times. It meant that I couldn't get to classes, but I was doing some other exercise. I wanted to bring yoga into the clinic, but there wasn't a way to do it. I thought, well, what would it look like if I just took some classes? I wasn't a teacher. And I started imagining what it might be like to talk about my experience, talk about the role of yoga. And so it started to just coalesce a little bit in my mind. Whilst I was in there, all of that was going on. I was getting better. I was asking to have more hours outside the clinic. I found myself challenged by crowds. I didn't realise that was going to be a byproduct. I was beginning to emerge into a person who wanted a quieter life. I was realising that I was letting go of corporate. There was no more need for the suits in the cupboard at home. I could see some space coming back to me. But I'd been for a number of years an MC at an event, a local community event, which was a fundraiser for two of the local primary schools, one of the Catholic primary school and the Hampton primary school. And the host, I was the host. The special guest for this was a mental health advocate called Lance Piccioni from Love Me, Love You, an ex-AFL footballer. So we used to get a footballer along and we'd do that sort of, the pie night stuff. But this was going to be a big conversation about his journey and what happened to him when he finished playing footy. And one of the guys said, would you be still prepared to MC? And I went, wow, that's an interesting forum to put myself out there in public. But I said yes.
And you're still in the hospital at the time?
Sorry?
Are you still in the hospital at the time when they request?
Yeah, I'm still in the hospital. I spoke to the psychiatrist. They gave me a night pass till 11 o'clock. I was allowed to come, which just meant I'd have to be breathalyzed when I got back. There's a no alcohol policy or like all those things. But they let me go down and do it. About 150, 200 people in the room. And Lance gives his personal journey. And it was powerful and it resonated to me. I was just extraordinarily taken aback by, the things that had been occurring in his youth that became manifest in his adult life, and all the while masked by professional football. So pretty much, it was an outlet for him to just be a hard ass and hit people. And, what happened after that is, possibly someone that you should bring on your podcast because he's a ripping storyteller as much as anything else. But I recognised for the room of middle-aged blokes, there was a disconnect. It was, we're in Bayside. Lance's journey is Glenroy and Moonee Ponds. And not only is it geographically just a bit isolated, the whole issue is disconnected. And I had on my wrist I had on my wrist my hospital bands, my dietary band, my restraint bands, all of these things. And I looked at my wrist and I went, this is my chance just to tell my story. So I said to Lance, when he finished, I said, would you mind if I just put 5 minutes on this? And he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't think, if anyone said to prepare for it, I don't think I'd ever do it. I'm just going to tell them what's going on at the moment. So I stood there in front of everybody and I said, if you'd like to hear what a local example looks like from within your community and how difficult it can be to identify, this is me. This is what's happened. It took a little bit longer than 5 minutes, probably took about 10 minutes. But I just said, look, here's my bands. I'm on night release. I can present myself as being completely well, yet I'm going through some of the most enormous personal challenges. I'm happy to talk. I've attempted to take my life. Our awareness of those around us needs to improve. Our ability to reach out for help needs to improve. And I'm on a personal quest to help people in the preventative space before it becomes the crisis space. I want to do the work that says arming people with the ability to understand themselves better and what changes in their mental health might look like, or how to manage those mental health changes, is the first step towards being able to recognise it in others. And right at that moment, for me, the burden disappeared for me. I am who I am. The community know who I am. I don't have to pretend. I don't have to pretend I'm well. I can talk about what I am on any given day. I can help others, but I wanted to structure it, and I needed to find a way. And part of that is just being that better person, and that journey to being a better person and aware of others. But also I wanted to put some structure to it from the things that I learned. And maybe there's some listeners there who've gone through a similar experience or have attended a psychiatric clinic as an inpatient or as an outpatient. And there's so much done for you by nurses, by counsellors, by psychiatrists, even just by other patients, to be honest, and sharing their stories. Everything I saw, there was conversation about nutrition, eating well, avoiding things, so avoiding things like alcohol, counselling about the understanding of self and mindfulness, psychiatry, a deeper understanding of physiological being, exercise, what exercise does to improve your sense of well-being and connects to your mind. And when I looked at it on that menu, I just went, well, the only thing I've ever done that captures it all in one place, and even nutrition, because nutrition sits behind yoga in a way, I won't go into the dietary elements of that, but Ayurvedic, diets, which is just about good eating, to be perfectly frank. We can trick it up, but I just call it good eating, sat behind it. So you've got the mindfulness, the meditation, the physical exercise, and your approach to wellness. And I went, it's there, but there's this enormous gap. Those 200 blokes who were looking back at me in that room, there was a third of them who averted their gaze, and I think I understood why they averted their gaze. There was a third of them surprised and maybe a little shocked. It does exist more than we understand, but also Richard Coyne, I just didn't get that. I never even knew. And a third who have this strength and awareness and understand their community, but and we're glad someone was saying it. And I looked at that first third and went, imagine those guys attending that yoga class that I went to 2 years ago. They'd call it mumbo jumbo. They'd say, nah, not a chance. I can't stretch. I can't move. I don't. Oh, yeah. And what's that incense stuff, mate? Come on. And so I went off and said, I'm going to become a teacher. And I went to Bali. It wasn't a hard decision to make, to be perfectly honest, to go and do this. And I put myself through teacher training, always with the mind that what I wanted to be was a teacher for men in a safe environment, that they could laugh at themselves, look clumsy in their footy shorts, their singlet, and come to it. But if I could get them started on that journey, if I could get them starting to think about what it means, even at the end of the day, just to lie on a mat for 5 minutes and maybe listen to my voice or just listen to silence, and then do some exercise that is about opening up the body, and then reflect on it at the end without this idea of pressure. And if you ask any guy what do they see in their head when you say the word yoga, they'll tell you that they see a lithe woman in an unbelievable pose doing something that is impossible for them. And my picture that I want to take them to take away is me standing at the front with them seeing if they could get their hands as far as their knees. And if we could get it halfway down their shins, that would be just an extraordinary little bit of mobility, but we'll take it from there. And so reinventing that was what the journey became of Men's Shed Yoga. So Men's Shed Yoga was born out of that terrible experience of my tough times with mental health, and also my corporate life. And the dovetail, the combination of that was it's serving me well to continue the practice and to be engaged with that very different community, a very most often gentle community, a very aware female community who work hard at looking after each other and those within just yoga, but also those around them. And a growing awareness for men that they need to start looking after themselves better, and an end of a corporate life that I have a moment to say this is my time in some structured way to pay back. And it's not completely altruistic, as I've explained, but I'm getting paid in that Bhutanese sense. I'm getting paid back in happiness. So I'm doing something. I'd love to be getting back to it sooner so that I can get some money. But that combination is allowing me to live a life better, allowing me to live a life in community and local. And I'm growing and developing. I'm still challenged with my mental health, no doubt. I'm still challenged with mental health. Everything around us at the moment is asking us about where we are with our mental health. But I'm not a bully anymore. I'm somebody wanting to share just the kinder and nicer side of myself.
Richard, what a transformation. I mean, that it occurred to me as you were sharing that story about, which I think is incredible, going to that event and emceeing it and, coming out of getting hospital leave to do it. It occurred to me while you were saying that I've heard that story before. I think probably, I can't remember when it was, but I was doing a sort of speaking gig at some father's men's health night. And one of the guys came up to me later on and said, recently he was at that event you're talking about. And he said, this guy got up and pretty much said, I'm in hospital for my mental health. And I came out to MC and I'm going back there tonight.
I said, I think I said, I can only talk for 3 more minutes, otherwise I miss my curfew and I'm in all sorts of trouble. So, yeah, it was, and the outreach from that room was extraordinary. It was really, really powerful. I'm sorry to cut you off, Carl. It just, because it struck me right in that moment, there are more men than we give credit for who are wanting to find that ability to have a conversation, who are wanting to be gentler, who, go to it and knock yourself out and be competitive on your bike and get the best time trial for a 55-year-old or 45-year-old and have all of that machismo. There's nothing wrong with that. It's exciting and it's fun and it gives us a buzz, and it's a little bit like that, that stress that gets us going, and we all take the piss out of each other and say, you're only a 54-year-old, Rich, and you can't beat a 65-year-old. That's gameplay and fantastic. But we need to find a way to be able to shift the dynamic of the conversation. My cycling mates have been extraordinary for me, have kept me alive, kept in check with me by phone, by dropping by, and they're caring men. And you don't often say that, and there's hugs, and there's not any hugs at the moment, and there's a closeness. I have other groups of friends, one of my dearest mates who, and you've got to be really careful, you're the professional, Carl, and it's just the life of experience. he's one of my closest mates, and I can see everything inside. But to let himself go and open himself up to his fears and his hopes is just a bridge too far for him at the moment. And so I never judge him by that. I don't say that that's a weakness. That's just a time in life, and maybe it'll come or maybe it won't. But if I'm brave enough to talk about my fears, hopes, and frailties, and then sit quietly with friends or with others, then we start to allow other people to do the same.
Well, especially for men, Richard, and that's why I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and being so vulnerable, because it gives, I can almost guarantee that this conversation, once we publish it, will give at least one bloke out there, if not more, permission to not only put his own mental health on the agenda, but hopefully take that first step to do something about it, which I suppose leads me to, the last question I want to throw at you, Richard. I'm sure there is a lot of guys, I know I've got a lot of clients who would resonate with the journey that you spoke about, especially early on. If there's a guy out there listening and really does resonate with some of those challenges of corporate life, of hospitality, or of the stress and sort of neglecting himself and getting caught up in just work and neglecting himself and all the other areas of his life, what would you say to him? What would your one bit of advice be?
Right now, taking everything into account, the way that we're living our lives, and I'll make the assumption that it's in Australia. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
I would say to take just a moment in the next 2 days to think about what life looks like if the ambition of our politicians, it's the ambition of the world, is to get back to normal. And we're using that word normal because that's what we hope it's that reluctance to change that says we want to get back to normal. For that one person, normal may well look terrifying because it means going back to something that is so stressful, so anxiety-ridden. And just ask yourself how you can change that, and how you can change that with professional help. With professional help. Not to say that you can write it down, journal it, and look at it and write those things down that are important to you. Write down the things that are scaring you. When I say scare, the things that have you well up. And they could be really positive things. I am scared that I won't be able to do something for my family. And then you might, that person translates that into, I need to go back to work. My kids don't need me back at work. They need me as a dad. They don't need the status. They don't need the money. They don't need any of that. So just ask yourself why, and then seek to unbundle it with professional help and go make that call. And I'm going to offer a very strong opinion here. If it is in a corporate environment, if it is in a public service environment, if it is in an organisation that chooses to make available employee assistance programs, that's okay to make a call, but go and get it on your terms with your person in your way. Don't rely. I went through it. I've seen it being used by others. It masks. It doesn't fix. And it's a longer journey than 6 appointments to get you back to work. They're two very, very different things, and not to confuse them. Get to someone like yourself, Carl. That's what has to be done. I chose to ignore that for too long.
Yeah, it's a great point about the EAP. I mean, they can be fantastic, but unfortunately, to a large degree, at times they are very much tokenistic. But also, if you don't click with that person, to not have the ability to choose your provider or somebody you do click with, I mean, that is what is essential. And I mean, I'm mindful, Richard, for you, throughout your story that you've shared with us today, so easily you could have become a statistic. So easily. And the sad part is, as we talk about this, 6 guys today will become a statistic. So if you're listening to this and resonating with what Richard's saying, please take that first step. Do something, as he said, take a moment to think about it, unbundle it, get some support, whatever that first step looks for you. Please take it. Richard, thank you so much for sharing with us that raw journey. It's inspiring to hear what you're doing now, and you've come out the other end. And I think there's been a lot of themes that we can catch up and have you on again down the track and have a second episode, because there's a hell of a lot we could talk about. But where can people find you, especially for our Bayside locals? Where can people find you on the socials and whatnot and get in contact?
Yeah, the easiest way, well, Richard Coyne. So if you just wanted to find me on Facebook, you could just look up Richard Coyne, and I think I'm the only Australian search, so that's pretty easy. Men Shed Yoga is where I've been engaging with people about yoga, and my phone number is on that Facebook page, and I'm more than happy to take phone calls, understanding that all I can do is offer some experience advice and then direct you to professional help. I'm not a counsellor. And I just, in the context of it being a podcast, Carl, I just want to convey, and I hope it's coming through in my voice, to everybody who is listening and knows that are feeling like they are at their most vulnerable. I have a smile on my face talking to you, Carl. I'm here, I'm well, I'm better. And the journey was okay. You learn so much and you become a better person. Take the courage to make that phone call, get involved with somebody and get yourself safe, because you'll have the same smile on your face as I do now.
Oh, there's light at the end of the tunnel, isn't there? Yep. Thank you again, Richard, so much. I really appreciate you and your time, and we'll chat to you soon.
Thanks, Carl. See you.
Thanks again for tuning in to the Bloke Psychology Podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, or share it with a friend or family member. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and if you're interested to find out any more about the work that we do at Bloke Psychology, just head to blokepsychology.com.au. Take care.